Welcome to the Spiggle Law Firm videocast. I'm Tom Spiggle, founder of the firm. We help people been fired or afraid that they might be. And today I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. John Golding. I know him as Jay. He's also a dear friend. We go way back when we were both pimply faced teenagers doing things we shouldn't do in Morganton, North Carolina, but he's now all grown up. He was a Morehead Scholar at the University of North Carolina. He did his medical school at the University of North Carolina and residency at the University of Virginia. And Jay, now how long have you been practicing medicine?
One of my patients commented the other day, next year will be 30 years. So at least it's only been 29 years. So
Yeah. You're a spring chicken. He's spring
yeah,
chicken.
they were looking at one of the wall things and said, you'll be a doctor 30 years next year. I said, no, that's not true. So
Right. I just started. This. Anyway, Dr. Golding has a lot of experience, and today we're going to be talking about something that many of our clients and people facing workplace issues have to deal with, and that is stress. I think we all know intuitively that stress has a negative impact on people, but can you give us a little more detail based on what you've seen in your practice and your medical background? What does stress do to the human body?
it's interesting. When you told me what it was about a little bit ago, I thought there's not a part of the body that stress does not affect. Seriously. Like you could name anything from your hair to your fingernails to all the way on the inside, and it's going to affect everything. I was thinking earlier, I thought, stress can actually make certain lines come out in your nails.
Huh.
Obviously, it can make your hair fall out. It can affect your thyroid, your heart, your emotional status, So every single component of your body is affected by stress. You could name anything and we could definitely find some medical links to stress causing issues. Blood pressure we see quite a bit, right? So, I do a lot of CDL physicals for Class A truck drivers, and they are relatively stressed sometimes coming in, and inevitably their blood pressure is high at first, and then we let them kind of calm down a little bit, and it gets a little better. But that's just a short-term stress. But certainly long-term stress from job, from finances, from your marriage affects it. I've seen it affect every part of the body.
Yeah, I'm sure that makes sense. And you raise a good point, and I'm sure this is true, that stress could exacerbate conditions you already have. So if you already have blood pressure, high blood pressure, if you already have some of the kind of ailment, it could make that worse.
Definitely. I had a patient who retired a couple years ago from a pretty large company. She had worked her way up and was in a pretty stressful environment. And I knew about it, kind of took care of her along that time. And we've joked about it since she's retired. I saw her a couple weeks ago. Everything has resolved. Like she's off blood pressure medicine. She's not taking anything. She had a little borderline diabetes, off of all medicine. Her hair has grown back in. She was worried about losing some of her hair. So she joked that she should have retired earlier and not had to take all those medicines. So you definitely see cases like that where when the stress in any environment decreases, a lot of times the medical conditions get better. Stress increases, they get worse. You have to double or triple the blood pressure medicine just because of stressful environments.
And is it, I know just enough to be dangerous about this, but is it the cortisol? Is that the elevated cortisol that?
Yeah, there's a lot,
Yeah.
definitely a lot of different components, that being one of them. When it spikes, the body likes it, but there's parts of the body that doesn't. Hence the reason a lot of heart attacks are first thing in the morning when there's a cortisol surge early in the morning. So, all of those situations, stress has definitely been led to, in younger patients, creating kind of what's called paroxysmal atrial fibrillation, where your heart can just speed up out of the blue, beat 170 times a minute. And, it's certainly all brought on. Now, obviously that pathway was there in the heart, but the stress made it come out.
Is there a difference? Maybe there isn't, but like kind of an acute stress that you might have, in the employment law situation, maybe you get fired and there's that kind of acute stress versus kind of the longer term chronic stress, like, for example, being unemployed. Do you see a difference there and how it affects the body?
Definitely. I mean, an acute stressful situation could cause an acute event, right? You've seen in the movies, somebody gets a stressful diagnosis or something happens pretty stressful, they have a heart attack, right? Or they have a stroke. It's kind of a little bit of a medical misnomer when they say, well, man, if I continue to be this stressed out, I'm going to have a stroke. Well, maybe, but obviously those are acute situations. Long-term stress, I think, is probably more detrimental on the body, because it's going to affect, like we talked about, every component from your outside to your inside. Stress causes hives. We know that. I have a lot of patients that will get recurrent hives in stressful situations where their skin completely erupts,
Yeah.
and you think, how is that possible? I thought about this a little bit ago. There's a lot of evidence in studies after acute situations. So, if you have a heart attack or you have an acute medical event, if you can decrease stress after that event, you have a better medical outcome. It's pretty obvious, right? But, to the point that there's been studies looking at post-MI, heart attacks and post-stressful medical events. If they go on something that helps stress, like a SSRI, like Zoloft, Prozac, Paxil, Lexapro, then their chance of recurrent heart attack or angina or chest pain decreases because their stress level is decreased. So,
Yeah.
leads you to understand why stress can cause it in the first place.
Yeah, that makes sense. What you say, I mean, first, I would just say, and I'm sure you would agree with me on this, that, particularly for your general practitioner, like you want to, right? Because, we all have, or most of us have a relationship with a general practitioner that we see periodically for one reason or another, to be very upfront, right? I think some people tend to hide those things, like, I'm having problems at work, because which leads to my next question, really, which is, when does somebody need to start thinking about seeking professional medical help, potentially, as you mentioned, prescription medication versus, and maybe it's not a versus, but, as opposed
Um,
to doing like exercise and, the things that are
well,
non-medical. Yeah.
certainly there's great ways without medicine to decrease stress. And you and I probably don't do them as much as other people, which is
Yeah.
like yoga and avid exercise. Clear evidence shows all of those things help decrease stress. Diet, obviously, having a better diet, can lead to decreasing stress in your life, being healthier overall. But I would tell folks, hopefully they have a pretty good relationship with a primary care doctor. If they don't, try to get one, and get them involved.
Mhm.
Um, you don't have to have a psychiatrist. You don't have to have a psychologist. Go to your GP and talk to them about they should know about your job. They should know about your marriage. They should know about your family. They should know about, all of the components of your life, and hopefully can kind of intervene and talk about it and say, hey, I've noticed this is, you know, seems to be, this has happened in your life. How are you responding to this? And be able to put all those data points together, the blood pressure, the cholesterol, the blood sugar, all of those things, thyroid, all affected by stress. So yeah, hopefully they've got a good relationship with somebody that can talk to them about that. And I'm pretty, despite being, despite prescribing a lot of medicine in the last 29 years, I do think there's a lot of ways without medicine. But of course, we have some great meds out there that are all generic and pretty cheap, and can get you through those stressful situations. I tell folks all the time, they're called SSRIs, right? We use them quite a bit, and I use them a lot. And I tell folks it gives you thicker skin. It
Right.
gives you a little armor to handle those stressful things at work or in the other environments, and let things bounce off a little better than taking them internally.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And speaking from kind of the legal side, I know it's very helpful to us when people are very upfront with their general practitioner because and nobody likes to get called in to testify at a trial, but when we have to, we can bring in the treating physician, and that doctor can really give a much better, like a whole picture of the person because they've sometimes been, I'm sure you have patients you've been seeing for decades. And so they can, the
Right,
doctor
right,
can speak to, right? Because as you know, like stress affects everybody differently. And a part of it is like, how is it affecting you? What's kind of the continuum of care? And a general practitioner is going to know that because like, hey, I've been seeing you since you're 25. Like
right,
I know what your life is like. I know how your body responds. And this is stress related. And so I think you need an antidepressant, right?
right,
Because I know
right.
you and I know how you respond to this.
Well, and you'd be surprised how many patients come in and say, "Well, my blood pressure's only up at work. I check it at work and it's elevated. When I get home and on the weekends, it's not elevated." And I explained to them, I said, "You're spending 50 to 60 hours at work. I don't want your blood pressure elevated for 60 hours of the week. Granted, it's okay on the weekends, but we still have to treat it while you're at work." So, yeah, I think having a comprehensive plan, yeah, of attack is the way to go, and diet, exercise, and a medicine if you need it.
Yeah. And I think people, probably don't realize this, but when you are in an employment dispute, if there is a trial or if there's litigation, one of the issues because you're entitled to get emotional distress damages if you've been suffering from a wrong that was committed at work, and you've got to put on testimony, right? You've got to show to the judge or the jury, like, yes, you experience emotional distress, and it helps when you have a medical professional who can
Right,
say, I've seen hundreds of patients and this was bad, right? Like she was under a lot of stress, had to put her on SSRIs, like, all this stuff that she had to do. And it was, it was real because a lot of juries, I think, are understandably skeptical, right? When somebody's like, oh,
right.
emotional distress, right? But if I have a doctor who's up there and be like, hey, I'm not a hired professional, I'm just their doctor. And I'm telling you that this was very real and had very real effects.
Well, and you see when that stressful situation is taken out of their life, either with retirement or they move jobs, it gets better.
Yeah.
and and their numbers get better, not just their emotional state, but their physical data gets better. It's pretty shocking, actually, sometimes to see. Like in that lady's case we were talking about, all of her numbers got better when she retired from her stressful job. And so, and who knows, to what degree stress in a work environment could cause a health issue. I mean, I honestly think it could cause about anything. You could argue that there are cases where stress has caused almost every ailment of the body.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that obviously we're not medical professionals, but we tell people like sometimes what helps stress is taking some kind of action, right? I think we all, have felt stressful situations, and part of the stress is you feel out of control, right? You don't know what to do. You don't, so whether it's going to get professional advice from a doctor or going to get professional advice from a lawyer, I know we've had people who come into our office who don't end up hiring us, which is fine because they have some
Mhm.
discrete issue that we're able to help them with, or we're just able to tell them what their options are. And a lot of times they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I feel so much better knowing that I have choices because
Right.
they come into us feeling like, I don't have any choice but to put up with this bad boss. I've been fired and I don't have any choice but to take this, the severance offer.
I've definitely suggested to a quite, I don't know how many, but a fair number of patients over the years that they need a new job.
Yeah.
You know, that they just need a new job. You need to find a new job. This
Yeah.
is not, this is gonna, you know, it's not gonna kill you. It might, but
Right.
but we always say that this job is gonna kill you if you stay with it. But you know, honestly, there are situations where the job could be so toxic that you just can't stay in that environment.
Yeah, it's just not worth it. And that's another great thing too, is you know, we work with a lot of other professionals who help people get jobs. And I'm like,
Mm,
sometimes we'll tell people like, hey, don't, don't hire us to pursue this. Like, take some of that money, hire a professional who will update your resume, who will update your LinkedIn profile, who can give you some job coaching, and help you get, that next better job. I think some people, like you say, just feel trapped, because they've been there for however many
That's
years.
right.
But,
Yeah.
there are a bunch of different ways now to get people to help you to find a different gig.
Well, it's stressful to, change is stressful.
Sure.
Even if you're in a stressful environment, the thought of change sometimes is stressful as well. So it kind of adds on a different level of stress, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. Well, I don't really have any other questions unless there's something we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about that's been extremely helpful.
No, no. Now you've got me thinking. I want to research this a little more and see, if there was a list of potential, medical issues that have been caused by stress, and proven. I can only imagine it would be books and books of diagnoses that we could relate it back to. So
Yeah, I'm sure that you will. We'll have to have you back on and go over that
there you
list
go.
when you find it. All right, Doc, I really appreciate it. It's been very helpful. Signing
Absolutely.
off. Let you guys
All
go,
right.
and good luck to everyone out there.
All right.
I will
Cheers.
let you get back to your next patient.
Okay.
All right,
Bye now.
bye.